Hey everybody, it's Troy. We're going to do a quick lecture today on permissions and the different types. We're going to focus, of course, on share and NTFS, and we're going to go through this PowerPoint that I've put together first. These are really important concepts for you to learn. You're going to be using them all the time as sysadmins. And this is one area where sysadmins tend to get themselves in trouble. So let's jump into this and see what we can learn. So the first thing that you need to learn is that um, there's an order to how these permissions work, and the natural state of almost anything in the computer and technology world, firewalls or permissions this way, or an app, is what's called implicit deny, which means you don't have to do anything as the sysadmin for permissions to be denied to everybody, right? It's just the default setting. In order for you to actually give them permissions, then you have to go in and do the implicit allow. And then there's also what's called inherited deny, and that'll make more sense as we talk about NTFS and how the permissions are passed down from parent to child. So inherited deny, of course, is if that main folder is denied to the person, any subsequent subfolder within that system and that structure will be denied. And the same with allowed. Any permission that allows it will be inherited. So that's the one that you really have to be careful with. Okay. Sometimes you'll hear the terms about explicit deny and explicit allow, and they're a little different than implicit. So just make sure that you know the differences between these two. The explicit, you won't be seeing anything about that on your exam or anything else. But there is another kind of style of denying and allowing that's out there, just so you know in case you go to research it or you read about it. Okay, that's what's called the explicit one. That's the explicit. Okay, so we're going to take a real quick look at this. This is a server that I have set up in a virtual configuration at the school, and what I've done is I've gone ahead and set up some share folders, And I did this on my domain controller, which is what you would never do that, but it was just easier to do it that way. You'll see that I've created a new volume, and I'm going to rename that so that I know exactly what it's for. But the reason I did it is I want it to be separate from my my C drive. And so you'll see that I've created these folders: accounting, IT, marketing, sales. And these are going to match up to security groups that are inside of Active Directory. And so this is going to make giving permissions and managing permissions really easy. Now, in Active Directory, you'll see that we make sure that we're in the right domain, because you can have multiple domains in Active Directory. And then we have our role group. Now, this was created by one of my classes in the fall semester last year. So we have all these different security groups. Role, which is what this is, and then we have you might have application access, you might have SQL access, whatever it is. Okay. Now, when you go to the role group, there's nobody in there right now into, let's say, help desk. So the first thing we need to do is look somebody up and make sure that they're in Active Directory. Okay? And the way we'll know they're in Active Directory is if we have their name and their fully qualified domain username come up and it's underlined. Now we know that we're getting an Active Directory object to use inside of our role-help desk security group. Okay? So let's add another one here real quick, and then we'll have at least a couple people. These are all people from previous classes. I was going to have you guys do this too, but this semester's it's just been really crazy, as you guys know. So now I've got some people inside this role group, all right? Now, the key here is that you don't want to add individuals to file structures. So if you remember, we had like IT, an IT folder, an accounting folder, sales, marketing, stuff like that. You don't want to add people. We have a user here, David. We don't want to add him directly to that folder system, right? And the reason that we don't is that every place you add him individually, if he were to change jobs or if he were to quit or get fired, you have to make sure you go back and look everywhere he was at individually and revoke those permissions. If you keep him inside of a role group, and then the role group is what's granted permissions, then he doesn't have, then it's a lot easier to control his permissions. If say he went from help desk to straight IT, or help desk to sales, all you would have to do is remove his name from help desk and put it into sales. And then any permissions that he had been granted through his role-help desk are now revoked, and he now has permissions through role-sales or whatever his new job is within the company. Okay? You can always go into these and click properties, and you can see who the members are. And we'll throw another member in here just so we have somebody. But that's key to managing the permissions. and this falls under the category of principle of least privilege. Okay, you have to give your users the exact permissions they need, no more and no less, and that's the principle of least privilege. They have access to just what they need and no more. Also, no less. Okay? So, anytime you grant permissions, make sure you're doing it through, number one, through Active Directory, but number two, make sure that you're doing it through the role groups that the security groups that you've added into Active Directory. And those groups can be called, you can set them up however you want. You can have a role group, you can have an application access group, you can even have a computer access group if there's a certain group of people you want to have access to a certain computer on your network. Say it's some kind of a virtual server, and you want them to have access to that. Well, you can do that. All you have to do is go in here and create a new security group, give it a name, and you create the folder, and then it's going to be there. And like I said again, this is the easiest way for you to be able to manage your users. So now we're going to go ahead and create some share files. Okay. So you notice that we're on our G drive, which we've named share, and we're going to create a subfolder under IT, and that subfolder is going to be scripts. Then we'll do another one, of course, documentation. It wouldn't be a class with me if we didn't talk about documentation. And so, remember, the reason we're doing this is that the permissions are going to be inherited by the subfolders. So any subfolder under IT or sales, whoever you've given permission to access the main parent folder, those same people will have permissions to access the subfolders. Okay, so keep that in mind. One of the things that I've found is that I usually like to make sure that I give. I'll create the main folder, and then I might help the groups create their own folders within there. But then after that, I kind of let them do whatever they want within there, because I control the parent folder. And with my ability to control the parent folder, I can control everything as far as permissions go. Okay. So, as you can see, when we pull up properties in documentation, it gives us our UNC path. So this is how people will access it, and they do that through their File Explorer. If they try to do it through Internet Explorer or whatever else, it won't. It's not going to show anything up, because they only have permission to go into this server, into this specific folder. Okay, and then it's child folders. And then we also, if you saw that, we'll go back to it here in a second, but in the NTFS settings, we had role-it, and we never added that to the documentation folder. We added it to the main IT folder, and then, of course, it inherits down from there. So here, if we go in, these are the share permissions. You'll notice there's only 3. in there. Now I'm going to go ahead and add this role group in here because we want to make sure that we have all of our bases covered. But we're adding them here, and we'll give them full control. Okay. Now, when we do our NTFS permissions, we don't have to give them full control. So you have share permissions, and there are 3 areas that you can grant or deny or allow. We'll use the terms allow or deny within share permissions. Okay? And you can see full control, change, and read. Also, within NTFS, there are 6 levels of permissions for you to choose from. So normally, if this is a folder that is a file share for a very specific role group, I'm going to give them full permissions to do this. I'm not going to worry about trying to limit their permissions in there because I've already limited the people that can even be in there to begin with. So because of that, and because I did something as granular as going with roles, and I can be as specific with roles as I want to be, then I don't have to worry about the NTFS permissions as much, because I'm going to allow them full control over what their little area is. If this was a general folder that everyone in the company had access to, and you were using the domain users group that's a default group within Active Directory, then I may worry more about making sure they can't delete things and stuff like that. Okay. In the case that somebody does screw something up, okay, then you have the ability in Windows to go back to a previous version of this folder and find whatever it is they lost. If it was a document, if it's whatever it is that they've lost, you have a chance to go back and help them find it. So you see what I'm doing here is I'm setting it up so that we have our shadow copy, and what the shadow copy is going to do is I can set a schedule of how often I want it to take snapshots of my folders, and those snapshots are what will save their bacon if they lose a file, if a file disappears, if they accidentally delete a file, which all of that will happen to you, I promise. It's happened to me multiple times when I was in IT. People were doing that. You can set this for daily. That's what I would do for people, because if you set it like weekly or every 2 weeks or something, then it really isn't of much help to them, because if they lost a file today and yesterday's copy is good enough because they know the changes that they had made before they lost it, then you're okay. You only lose just a few hours of work. If you only set it up every couple of weeks, you're going to lose a lot of work that way. So I always just set it up to be every day, and I usually do it every couple of hours, so that it's constantly making sure that that's okay, making sure that it's getting good copies of stuff as it changes. Plus, it doesn't take up very much room, and its space is cheap, it's cheap to add space. Getting a new hard drive that's bigger or replacing your hard drives bigger is actually pretty cheap. So that's what, I wouldn't worry about that. So now if we go back into the file share, you can see that if we had a problem in accounting, we could go down, we could go to properties, we could go to previous versions, and there it is. And then if we were to open that up, now there's nothing in there because we haven't put anything in. But if this were real, your real network, if you were to open that up, you would find whatever documents accounting's put in there. As you can see, there's our accounting properties with the previous version, and it was taken at 2:51 on the 11th. And if there were documents in there, then those documents would be available for us to restore. And it's just like anything in Windows. When you have a document in one folder, you want to move it to the other, you can just drag it over. That's all you have to do. It's that simple. So that's a good thing to make sure you have set up. You don't want to find out that you didn't set it up when they call and say they've lost a document. Then it gets to be a bigger pain in the butt. Again, IT, they have it. And the reason that all of these people have it now is because you set the permission to be on the actual volume, which in this case is our G volume. That's where you set this up at. So once you've set it up there, it cascades down to all of the folders that are contained within that volume. And in our case, it's the G drive, and it's the file shares, as we call it. Okay. So again, we've gone through this part. All right, so now we've taken a look. Now we're back looking at AD, and we're also looking at our file shares at the same time. So we've done our docking different items to each side that you can do in Windows, which I think is really cool. I'm sure Mac does it somehow too, but since I have such a distaste for Mac, we won't talk about that. Anyway, so this lets us know who has permission to the role of IT. Now, if you notice in here, the role IT is a member of FS-IT and of a computer group. So you see how it says CA? So that's the computer access group. And so anybody who's in the IT group, this is where you can tell what they have access to. So you have individual user objects inside the role group. Then when you look at the role group and you look at the member of, so that's where we have added the role IT group as a member, which gives it permissions and access. They have permissions to a computer, which is a DHCP service or DHCP server, and also to the file share -IT. So we know exactly where these guys in this group have access to. And that's important. That helps you, again, if you ever get audited by a government agency or a customer, and they ask, how do you make sure that you've restricted people's permissions? This is the way you can tell them that you've restricted permissions, by making sure that you use security groups, and that only security groups are used to grant, those are what are, you grant permissions to those security groups. And then there's only certain security groups, like the role group, where you actually add the user objects to it. The other thing that we need to keep in mind is, you guys have all heard the AAA, which is authorization, access, and accountability. Okay? And these three things are things that you need to keep in mind as you are working through Active Directory and allowing people to do things inside your domain. And if you have questions on what those three things mean, access or authorization, access, and accountability, it's really simple. Authorization is someone proving who they are. That's usually like username, password. It's always the rule of thumb. Something something you have, or something you are, is a way to prove your identity. And then, of course, accountability is, we want to be able to know exactly who's doing what inside our network, and we want to know what they're doing, what they did it to, when they did it, what they did, and where they did it from. That way we have a tight control over what we're actually, when something gets changed, we know what's happened. That's why it's important, just a side note here real quick. Local accounts, you have to do everything in your power to not create local accounts. And the reason is that local accounts are they're bad news, and all they do will cause you headaches. And remember, on your domain controller, you do have a local administrator, and that local administrator account has full rights through the domain controller, and you can't delete it. So either disable it, or make the password really difficult for anybody to remember, and put it into a password program so that you have it. But remember that local admin can do a whole bunch of stuff. Anyway, so here's a graphic on share permissions. Remember, we have share, which is kind of that's that first layer. And you don't have as much, you don't have as many options here. You only have 3 versus 6. So this actually is it's kind of an older type of a permissions grouping, and so you don't really use the share permissions as your main thing, but it's good to know that they're there, so that you know what people have been allowed or not allowed. And actually, this can mess you up too, because we'll talk about that in a second. But here are your NTFS permissions. You'll notice you have a lot more granularity control-wise in NTFS than you do in share. you can, you can really get down to the nitty-gritty on this. And that's important because sometimes there may be a role that needs access to uh, a folder, but they only need access to read the contents that are there. So, for example, sales and marketing tend to work together, but you might have them two separate roles, and the salespeople may need to get into marketing. The salespeople may need to get into marketing and be able to see what they're doing, and but they don't want them to be able to change. They don't want them to be able to change what what they have in the folder. They just want them to read it. So another important thing that you need to realize is that the most restrictive permission is what will win. It doesn't matter if it's a share or if it's an NTFS permission. So for example here, if the share permissions read and NTF permissions are full control, the net result is they're only going to be able to read any of those folders. That's why it's so important that you are cognizant of what you're doing in share permissions as well as in NTFS permissions. But especially share, because if you really lock that down, then no matter what you do in NTFS, you're still going to end up with just share permissions. So it's important to pay attention to what you're doing, and make sure that the most restrictive permission you're using, I would say, just a personal opinion, is to use it in NTFS. Something else that's important to remember too is that the permissions that you're granting to people, and that when you're doing it in your folders, there are reports that you can run, and there are you can do it in Windows, but there are some third-party apps that you can run, and I think there's several of them that are open source, but it will actually give you like a table or a chart that will show you what the net result is and what the NTFS permissions are on any given machine that you have in your network. So that's something you'll learn about more in 4600 when it comes to monitoring a network. But anyway, second example here, just the opposite. If you give somebody full control and share, but then only give them read and NTFS, your net permission is going to be read. And so that's why I say it's better to just give everybody full control and share permissions, and then inside of the NTFS permissions, get granular with it, lock it down, because you have 6 ways to lock it down in NTFS as opposed to share, which only has 3. And the more options you have, the better off you're going to be, and the more secure you'll be, and the more you'll be in compliance with principal of least privilege and all the other organizations that you need to be in compliance with. So that's just a side note, but it is important to know and to understand. In review, you'll see that, again, share only offers 3 choices, limits your control. NTFS, it gives you 6. You get more flexibility, and you get tighter security. And when you use NTFS and you point the permissions at security groups within Active Directory, you have much more secure files. And the reason that they're more secure is that, first off, of course, the NTFS permissions are very granular. But more importantly, as a system admin, when you need to revoke permissions, you want to be able to do it as quickly as possible. You don't want that hanging over your head. So you can go in and you can revoke those really quickly and make sure that there's something that they're done fast and they follow the principle of least privilege, so you keep yourself safe that way. All right. Not a simple share, a simple volume. You have one disk. It's super easy just to go into that and then all you have to do is shrink the main volume by however much space you think you need. 5 gigs, 3 gigs. And once you do that, then you'll see that you'll have a box come up that will be unallocated. And right here, it's got a black thick line over the top. It says unallocated. You right click, pick, new simple volume, and then you're going to pick a drive letter for it. And you can pick whatever drive letter you want, except for C. C's reserved, of course. Once you have your drive letter picked, just follow the wizard. Make sure you have NTFS checked so that, because we're doing file shares, so we want NTFS. We don't want any of the older ones. And then we'll do the quick format on it so that because it's super fast to do it this way. We don't need the compression or anything like that. And then you see now we have another new volume. And then we can rename it. If we go up here, click on it, hit F2, and then we can name it whatever we want, like I did on the G where we did file shares. So that's how easy it is. Super simple, doesn't take a lot, but sometimes these things that appear to be the easiest are the ones that people will ignore the most and get themselves into real trouble doing. So make sure that you're following the rules and that you're really paying attention to what you're doing, so you don't end up giving permissions to the accounting and payroll folder to everybody in the company. That has happened, and usually all it does is just piss everybody off and make you want to quit when you see what other people are making. So ignorance is bliss when it comes to what other people are making. So anyway, that's about it for this lecture. If you guys have questions or anything else, please let me know, and join us for our next session that's coming up. And that's going to be Monday the 15th at 4 o'clock. It's the open discussion. Love to see you guys there. Make sure you're going through and doing the reading, because your final is going to be based a lot on the reading itself. And then really the last thing we're going to be doing is server security and update management. So it's pretty basic stuff, but you'll find out that a lot of people don't do it. So anyway, have a good day, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.